It's good to see everybody who's here in front of me and everybody who's here behind me. Welcome. I want to just begin tonight with a little blessing, and we'll light the candle. I'm just borrowing from One Earth Sanga's wonderful invocation. We pay respects to the indigenous people of each place who through the years and to this day have loved lands, waters, and ecological communities into their well-being. We're grateful for their wise and loving efforts. We honor the lives of those who have contributed so much to our human family and yet have been habitually devalued and exploited. We pay respects to the Asian ancestors from whom these teachings and practices have come and have been preserved for the last 2,600 years. We are deeply in their debt. And we at IMCC honor and call into our hearts and minds our ancestors, our teachers, and our Sangha with gratitude for the love, life, and wisdom they share with us. So tonight, I'm going to talk about wise effort. And for those who have been around, maybe you've been in and out over the last several months, but in October, we began this series on the Noble Eightfold Path and the 8 factors that can guide every aspect of our practice and our lives. And I described it as, using Gregory Kramer's words, described it this way: these 8 factors. With right view and right intention, we lay the foundation for wisdom, sensing that freedom is possible and beginning to orient our lives around that possibility. With right speech, right action, and right livelihood, we build street-level wisdom and clean up our act so that we can live harmoniously with others and begin to calm down. Then with right effort, like the remaining 2 path factors of mindfulness and concentration, we deal with the direct training of the mind. So tonight we'll talk about wise effort, which is the energy that drives this wholesome cycle of ethical action and practice and change in our lives. I'm going to start off with a couple of reflections on effort and mindfulness. The first is Rosemary Watola Tromer's poem, Ambition. I am so far from the woman I want to be, so far from humility and simplicity. I dream of clearing not only the shelves, not only the closets, but also the cluttered inner rooms that crowd out the divine. Every day I search for ways to best meet the day with poems, beautiful meals, with songs, with praise, so many ways to be radiant. But I suspect all the day wants is for me to meet it with all that comes into my path, with kindness, with spaciousness. In my effort to be good, to be whole, I make it so difficult, this life. The day doesn't seem to hold my exuberance against me. It shows up as always, generous as a new tomorrow, quiet as dawn. So she makes us wonder whether our effort, so having so much effort, our ambition, might actually get in the way of meeting all that comes in my path with kindness and with spaciousness and with awareness. But here's another perspective from Ajahn Chah. He's a Thai forest master who was the teacher of many of the early Western Buddhist teachers. And Ajahn Chah says, naturally, people who wish to reach their home are not those who merely sit and think of traveling. They must actually undertake the process of traveling step by step and in the right direction as well, in order to reach home. If they take the wrong path, they may eventually run into difficulties like swamps or obstacles or dangerous situations, thereby possibly never reaching home. In the same way, walking the path to reach the Buddha Dhamma is something each one of us must do individually, for no one can do it for us. And we must travel along the proper path of morality, concentration, and wisdom, until we find the blessings of purity, radiance, and peacefulness of mind that are the fruits of traveling the path. However, if one only has knowledge of books and scriptures, sermons, and suttas, that is only the knowledge of the maps or plans for the journey. Even in hundreds of lives, one will never know purity, radiance, and peacefulness of mind. Instead, one will just waste time and never get to the real benefits of practice. Teachers are only those who point out the direction of the path. After listening to the teachers, whether or not we walk the path by practicing ourselves and thereby reap the benefits or the fruits of practice is strictly up to each one of us. So this reminds us that progressing along this Eightfold path, it takes the energy of wise effort that turns our aspirations into action. We can hear about the teachings, but until we apply the teachings in our own lives and make them our own, we really might not see any benefits of that practice. And he talks about the importance of practice along a proper path of morality, concentration, and wisdom. And it's hard to hear those teachings of Ajahn Chah without becoming a little bit tight and judgmental about our own practice. You know, we start to wonder, oh, am I on the proper path? Am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? So it's no wonder that applying this idea of right effort to our meditation practice can be a bit of a loaded term. You'll notice I opt to use the term wise effort rather than right effort because I believe it carries less implied judgment about whether we're doing it right or wrong, good or bad. And I'll ask you to take a moment and consider when you think of wise effort in your practice, what reactions come to mind? Any thoughts or judgments? What does that mean to you? Is it like, oh no, am I doing enough? Or, oh yay, here comes the hard stuff. How do you feel about it? Like maybe not too much, not too little. Effort falls on a continuum, but people do tend to lean one way or another, and sometimes we switch from time to time. But you may feel as though your effort's on the low side, maybe it's too loose. You feel as though you've been sort of slacking off on practice or avoiding it, or having trouble maintaining a commitment to a regular practice, or remembering why you started in the first place. And then others may feel that they're making a really great effort, and maybe just a little too stressed and too tight. We live in a culture that supports us striving and winning at all costs, and that can translate into us feeling as though we have to be the best meditator, or we have a comparing mind or some self-judgment and try to decide whether we're good enough. Am I better than last year? Am I better than most of the other people in this group? So as we meditated, perhaps you recall hearing, now let go of all effort. And how did you react to that idea of letting go of all effort? Was it a welcome release? First time I heard that phrase, I remember feeling such relief because I realized I was trying so hard to do it right. So just want to take a moment. You can keep your eyes open or closed. Just a moment to think. What's your default tendency? Maybe pushing too hard for your practice, making it too easy, too tight or too loose? Do you find yourself leaning in one direction or another? It's not to say that effort is good or bad. It takes energy and effort to swim against the stream of our bad habits and change them. You know, just an example, an everyday example, I think of physical therapy. And it can be helpful to heal our body parts, you know, that get worn down or injured. And we come to our therapist with a goal to get healthy and without pain. And it really helps if we have faith in that therapist because, you know, they have a good reputation and a clinical degree. But when those exercises that they give us are hard or painful, you start questioning yourself and your therapist. But I've been lucky, and for me, with each session, I get a little stronger. I'm asked to lift more weight, and I find, wow, I can do it. And it's not always pleasant, but with repetition, and effort, and guidance, and encouragement, I find that I'm seeing progress. And I could just do these exercises at home, but when I come in, I get little tweaks in my practice, a little bit of encouragement, and see the others, you know, making progress in my PT Sangha. Well, sometimes it makes it worthwhile to go into the clinic. And, you know, clearly this can be a metaphor for our meditation practice, where we have a goal of finding happiness and freedom from suffering. And teachers offer us exercises in the form of the teachings. And with repeated practice, we tend to become stronger. We tend to build those muscles, and we might become more motivated. We might notice some things are working and that it changes the way I engage with the world. We start to see the fruits of our practice. A couple of years ago, I found I struggled with concentration practice. My mind would just really get distracted. I was frustrated by it. And I decided that I was going to focus on this because it was really important to establishing mindfulness and wisdom and developing my practice. But it definitely wasn't my favorite. I tend to resist routine or rote prayers, but I sought out the teachings on the Satipatthana Sutta, some of the basic teachings on establishing the foundations of mindfulness, and studied for a bit, especially in a class. And there we went through these repetitive contemplations of the body and the elements and the breath and the death contemplations, one right after the other, and then some of the teachings. And I was so surprised when, after a while of doing the practice in this way, I found that I really attained a state of presence and awareness that I just never had in the past. Doing this for me was effective. It was beneficial. I could sort of feel the joy of establishing mindfulness when I sat down. It was worth the effort. And to this day, I tend to spend the first 10 to 15 minutes of my practice just establishing a sense of calm and mindfulness and concentration before I turn to some of the other practices that I enjoy, like investigation or heart practices or open awareness. So it's like the effort of riding the bicycle uphill and then this gliding downhill of enjoying the mindfulness that you build up. So it's a place where effort can help. But each of us needs to determine when or whether greater practice, more focused practices is warranted. We need to balance effort and ease. There's a story about the Buddha at Jeddah Grove, about the way he talked about balancing effort and ease. The Buddha was asked, "How did you, sir, cross the flood?" And the Buddha answered, "Without tarrying or hurrying did I cross the flood." "But how did you, sir, without tarrying, without hurrying, cross the flood?" And the Buddha said, "When I tarried, then verily I sank. When I hurried, then verily I was swept away. And so, friend, untarrying, unhurrying, did I cross the flood." So this is not about do we apply effort or no effort. It's more about a balance between the effort that's too strenuous for a given task and the effort that is too lax for a given task. The core teachings around right effort or wise effort are the 4 right efforts that the Buddha described. that we need to endeavor to prevent unwholesome states, abandon unwholesome states, and that we need to cultivate wholesome states and maintain wholesome states. So it's a reciprocal relationship between the unwholesome states that we abandon and the wholesome states that we cultivate. It's out with the bad and with the good. And by clearing out the unwholesome states, we make room in our mind for the beneficial states to flourish. So when agitation is abandoned, calm is present. When jealousy is abandoned, we can cultivate joy for another. So it's about identifying these unwholesome states when they arise. And this is what we do when we practice, right? We identify the thoughts that are running around, or we identify the judgments that are happening in our mind. And we do our best to let them go and to maybe instead to cultivate the beneficial states that can replace them. These unwholesome states are things like our obsessions, our biases, our tangles, our delusions, the clinging, the greed, the hindrances like desire and anger and aversion and worry, the things that lead to suffering. So we prevent them from flourishing with ethical behavior and by catching them just as soon as we can and letting them go. And we abandon the unwholesome states when they've taken hold with some energy and effort to change our habits by not pursuing them and letting them go as soon as we notice them. And by remembering that this holding and letting go and releasing involves not just in the mind, but also in the body, to identify when we feel these aversive states in the body and in the mind. And then the wholesome states that we replace them with, we cultivate and maintain these beautiful qualities of mind, the generosity, the compassion, loving kindness, joy, all of those awakening factors like mindfulness and energy and tranquility and concentration, the things that lead to our awareness and freedom. So when joy arises, it's beneficial. It helps the mind to let go. We cultivate it and latch onto that. The Brahma Viharas, the heart practices, thrive on attention. We set up a positive feedback loop when we generate them and cultivate them and maintain them. So we're to strive to maintain these skillful states. And as we mature in our practice, we develop a greater sensitivity to tune into what is wholesome and what's beneficial for us and what's unwholesome and unskillful. As we become more mindful, we're able to relax and feel and notice these states when they emerge early, and tap into that deep sense inside of what is wholesome in our lives and in our practice. So this is the bread and butter of our practice. This is what we do. We're more aware. We can make more skillful, more wholesome choices in any moment. And we apply these wholesome and unwholesome choices in the path, in our lives, by pondering, is this speech wholesome? Is this action I'm about to take with my family wholesome or beneficial? Am I bringing wholesome effort to my livelihood? Or do I notice that greed or worry are driving my choices? And we also apply this wise effort to our practice. Listening to ourselves, to our own bodies and hearts and mind, we decide what effort is needed in this moment. More energy or more calm, more or less effort. When you try to decide how you should proceed, do you ask, should I make sure that I meditate for 30 to 45 minutes every day, or is it more important that I take that walk in the woods? Do I need more heart practice or more inquiry to investigate my tangles? More attention on the breath or more focus on spacious awareness? Should I listen to this teacher or that, or this tradition or that? Do you ever wonder these things? I spend a lot of time wondering these things. And even when we have the energy to establish a regular mindfulness practice, sometimes we can be confused about how to practice. And it can cause us to restlessly change from one practice to another, and so that they don't really take hold. We deplete our efforts by casting about and trying everything. There's another Ajahn Chah story. He says, doing this, it's like the example of the man who tries to make a fire by rubbing two sticks together. You know, you're just rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. And he begins rubbing very energetically, and he rubs on and on, but then he gets impatient. He goes, this isn't working, I'm taking a break. And he gets the sticks out again, and he's rubbing them, and he's rubbing them, and he's rubbing them, but then he starts to lose heart, and he takes another break for a while. And then he starts again, but then he just decides that this isn't working. There's no fire here. And the fire was there all the time, but he didn't carry on to the end. He didn't carry on until he was able to start that fire. So to determine what level of effort is needed or wise for ourselves, we need to make a U-turn from, instead of looking out to that teacher, that book, that guidance out there, and then make a U-turn and ask ourselves and tap into that deep source of wisdom within us and pause and relax and feel what's wise, what's beneficial for my practice. Spring Washam says, listen to your heart and trust the direction you're being pulled. Something inside you already knows what to do. So we can become our own teacher and give direction to our practice through this personal reflection and listening to our heart, saying, what is needed here? And then really, really listen, because your heart knows what's needed. And deep down inside, there's this sensitivity that knows this is wholesome, this is healthy, this is what's needed. Gil Fronsdale says there are many Buddhist books, but the best is the Buddhist book of you, the one you find in your own heart. That's the one you need to read. He suggests learning to recognize the ah or the ouch. You know, the ouch is when you try on a shoe and it's too tight and you go, ouch. And the ah is when you try on a shoe that fits and you go, ah, it feels good. Well, the same goes for practice. Does this action or this practice I contemplate feel wholesome and onward leading and joyful? That's the ah. Or does this practice that I contemplate generate clinging or tension or other hindrances? The ouch. And just to pause and relax and to feel. And to imagine a time when you meditated recently, tonight or another time. And ask, when I practice meditation, what about this practice felt wholesome or beneficial or helpful? You may feel like an opening, you may feel a benefit, you may love to do it. It might be the ah. Just take your time to relax and feel and identify any felt sense in the body. What about this practice feels wholesome? You might just take a couple of notes. And then again, just pausing and relaxing, and turning inward and feeling, when I practice meditation, what feels unhelpful or unwholesome or unskillful? It may feel like a constriction or a judgment, an ouch. Just a couple of notes of what might feel unwholesome. All right. And just a note, if anybody's new to practice, just know it just might be about what do you like about practice, what feels good, or alternatively, what's difficult. It's totally fine. We're just trying to tap into that sense, your own inner knowledge and intuition about what's wholesome for you when you practice. We're going to wrap up, but I just wanted to share a couple of tips around knowing when effort is wholesome. There's Jill Shepherd has this wonderful distinction that she makes between efforting for the Dhamma, for the teachings, for freedom or truth, and efforting for self-making. She said, watch out when you're trying hard and there's a lot of I, me, mine conversation going on. Has anyone noticed my perfect practice? You know, if your thoughts are full of self-making and how I want to be better, that might be a clue that the efforting is maybe not beneficial. Another thing to watch for, I talked a little bit about, is that negativity bias. We pay more attention to what's harmful because we're trying to protect ourselves. And just know that we can keep ourselves occupied with all the unwholesome things, but really try to pay attention to opening up that space for the full spectrum of beneficial experiences like joy and tranquility and making space. Sometimes when those hindrances and those unwholesome things are gone, it becomes quiet in there. Mm-hmm. And we think we're not doing anything. And see if you can't just tap into the joyful aspects of being without those hindrances and enjoy that. We sometimes get addicted to the intensity and the drama of the highs and lows, but allow in some of that space. And remember that Sangha plays a critical role in our effort to cultivate wholesome behavior. We support one another and we make it more fun. So as we seek to find that balance in our lives, it's helpful to think of a balance between what Ken McLeod calls quest and rest. We may need to make some effort and have some diligence to train our minds and reach a state of mindfulness and concentration. But then we need to rest. Rest in the spaciousness, the compassion, and the patience to allow the tangles to untangle and the wisdom to emerge. And I'll leave the last wise words for the poems from the first free woman, the 2,600-year-old poems of the first Buddhist nuns. And this one from Vipassana is called Calm. How do you cross the flood? You cross calmly, one step at a time, feeling for stones. How do you cross the flood, my heart? You cross calmly, one step at a time, or not at all.